Welcome to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neal Howard. Thank you for joining us here on the program today. There's research that shows that every hour, 2 toddlers are treated for injuries related to strollers or car carriers, and most of these kids are suffering head injuries, including concussions. Our guests in studio today are returning to talk with us, Conquering Concussion, Healing TBI Symptoms with Neurofeedback and Without Drugs, written by Mary Lee Esty and Carol Shifflett, both of which are in studio today with us to talk about some of the long-term consequences of traumatic brain injury when those injuries occur in young kids. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Neal.
Thank you. Now, you've authored the book Conquering Concussion. Now, Mary, your background, you're a medical practitioner. Talk about your background and how you got into treating traumatic brain injuries.
I'm a social worker.
Oh, okay. Okay.
With a license in a doctorate in health psychology, and then I got into biofeedback and neurofeedback.
Well, tell our listeners about biofeedback and neurofeedback and how it's helping folks, especially when they're dealing with traumatic brain injuries. Sometimes they result in severe headaches. Sometimes severe headaches without the injury are still being treated with this technology.
Yes. Just quickly, biofeedback is an umbrella term for any kind of therapy that uses some information that it's possible to get back from your own body using simple technology. And now, of course, computers can just provide an enormous amount of information about how our own systems are working together or not. And when the information that is received by the computer is from the brain, from the central nervous system, there are many, many ways to help a person learn to reduce their symptoms. For example, MRIs are being used now to reduce pain. It's a very expensive way to do that, but being in an MRI machine, and I think this was first done at Stanford, a person can see an image of the hot spot in the brain that is involved in pain. Mm-hmm. And they are told, now just imagine that spot getting smaller and smaller. And so using a kind of guided imagery, it works. Well, biofeedback practitioners using simple laptops mm-hmm. are able to do that now. And so effectively that even Cleveland Clinic, the cardiology unit, has now published their research getting information from a screen with sensors just on the fingers, nothing invasive, okay? Mm-hmm. Painless, nothing invasive, simply learning through information that one can see about your own body on a computer screen. They have been able to take people off of the heart transplant waiting list.
Off of the heart transplant. That's amazing.
And they practice at home with some simple devices. The brain is capable of doing an enormous amount. So that's an incredible example of the power of biofeedback. We use it here. Many neurotherapists and biofeedback therapists around the country are using this to help with panic attacks, anxiety, test anxiety. It's possible to find practitioners around the country. There are a couple of websites, bcia.org and aapb.org, because there are many people doing this, and many physicians are getting involved in this. There was a big article in the Washington Post, which is my area, with a psychiatrist in New York City, Hassan Asif, ASIF, who is using neurofeedback. Has a wonderful picture of a cap on the head that he is using and helping people with depression, with mm-hmm. all kinds of mood disorders. But depression is a common aftermath of concussion. So, the body doesn't sort of neatly segment things out like our diagnostic manuals try to do. Mm-hmm. So that's just, as we were talking earlier, headache seems to respond to neurofeedback even though you start out thinking you're treating just traumatic brain injury or post-traumatic stress. They all fit together somehow. So neurofeedback is using information from the brain to help a person in one way either learn by watching the screen to change the way their brain is firing, or there's the kind that I do is a passive kind, an offshoot of that in which the brain and the computer are interacting with each other. So our brain is our best friend in many, many ways. It is always trying to heal itself. And the computer technology now enables us to, even in a stronger way, help heal our own systems. So pain goes down, cognition goes up, people are able to return to work, they're no longer being in fights and being put in jail. There's a lot of that because the violence and impulsivity follows concussion and head injury. There's a lot of data behind that.
What about these injuries in kids who they're not experiencing any combat situations, they're not doing adult things, and the injury happened to happen on the playground, yet they're going to go through depression? Does the brain have to be an adult brain in order to give this valuable information, or does it work regardless?
Not at all. Really well on children because the likelihood is that they are going to be diagnosed as being attention deficit with or without hyperactivity. That's been known for a long time, and there's an enormous amount of information coming out now. I think most recently was in Journal of American Medical Association, the neurological thing about pediatric traumatic brain injury and attention deficit. It's the symptoms are almost the same. So the treatment, neurofeedback, is just a wonderful treatment for that because the American Academy of Pediatrics has listed, they call it biofeedback, but all of the research they cite is neurofeedback as a level 1 intervention to be recommended by pediatricians for these attention deficit disorders.
Carol, the brain has been injured, either severely or at all. How can we trust that the feedback from this injured organ is accurate?
What it's looking at, what the system is looking at, is the speed, the quality of the brainwave. You have your very fast waves, you have your very slow waves, and it isn't that any of them are good or bad, it is that they are appropriate when they are appropriate. You want the brain to be doing what it needs to do. You want balance, So you have the faster waves, the beta waves, for example, are the ones that you want for alertness and boom, 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 getting things done, good memory, sharp responses, that sort of thing. Alpha, slightly lower, which we all know from the 60s, is a more relaxed brainwave, appropriate where relaxation is when it's time to relax. Theta is your pre-sleep wave. That's slower and longer. That's what comes up with the images that you see right before you fall asleep. And delta is your deep sleep wave. Now, when you have somebody walking around who never, ever goes above alpha, you're going to see someone, you can guess this pretty well just by seeing someone who is a little foggy, a little out there, a little quiet, and,
kind of spacey.
Spacey is a good word for it. They're in a different space. And you to make a map of that person, that's what you will see. You have people even walking around in theta. Those are your ADD folks, kids. Very strong ADD signature, theta signature in ADD. And you also have people walking around in delta, in the frontal lobes, injured frontal lobes. Frontal lobes, especially on the left side, are supposed to be the fastest part of your brain. When you have delta signals coming from there, you have someone, Mary Lee has a wonderful phrase for this, conscious coma.
A conscious
coma. I think we
coma.
mentioned this last time. The conscious coma. Their brain is not really awake, and it is not remarkably different from the person who is actually lying in a bed in a coma.
Wow.
The only difference is they're walking around, and that is such a great phrase. Or not, They may be the one that is sitting in the basement apartment, staring at the wall for several years. Mary Lee, you had some comments on that, I think.
Mary,
there's a wonderful test that will show whether the brain is working right or not. It's called a quantitative EEG. The National Institute of Medicine put out a book on sports injury about 2 years ago. Beautiful, wonderful thing about almost every aspect of sports injuries. The quantitative EEG, which neurofeedback people use, will show, it makes a map of brainwave activity. It shows where the imbalances are in the way the brain is producing these various speeds of neurons. When there is an imbalance, people will be symptomatic. It can be in a variety of ways, but they will not be functioning as well as they could. I just finished treating a couple of retired NFL players. One was actually diagnosed with dementia. The other one was not in quite that bad a shape, but of course they had many, many years of playing. And the quantitative EEG showed this. And in fact, it is now, there's data out that, first of all, the Supreme Court has approved the use of quantitative EEG data in lawsuits.
Ooh.
It is accurate. It has been used just forever. And it gives a percentage, a number of the percentage likelihood that the imbalances that the map shows are from a head injury. It's called a TBI discriminant.
Maybe a mention of why it would have been in the Supreme Court. It's because the courts, so many lawyers have tried for so many years to block it because it shows too much information too well.
Yeah, and it doesn't fit well when you're trying to defend someone who's wrong.
Yeah.
And in fact, it is the only thing that shows after a sports injury, well, it could be any injury, but in this book it's about the sports injuries, whether the brain is really healed enough to return to play. Right now, children are put back, especially the young children, are put back on the field much sooner than they should be. Just imagine, you've got a 6-year-old and the coach says, well, how do you feel? Well,
he wants to play.
There's not a lot of baseline there, right, to know whether you really feel good or not when you're 6. If you're awake, you're okay. And that's dangerous.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the effects of each subsequent head injury build on each other. The brain never truly goes back to its original healthy state, which is why nutrition is so terribly important, because our bodies, including the brain, are always healing. I mean, just think of how many cuts you've had over your lifetime. But what if they didn't heal? We'd all be a mess of Band-Aids, right?
Yeah. Or worse.
The brain is well, right, mummies, maybe. So the brain's always trying to heal, but it needs good nutrition. And it appalls me. I ask people, what do you eat for breakfast? Most people, it's something that is mostly sugar.
Yeah.
That's not usable.
So
you need good, balanced nutrition. It makes a huge difference. And in kids and adults who are have attention problems, once I get them to eating a good, balanced breakfast, whole grains and lots of protein, good quality protein, their grades go up.
Wow.
Their performance at work goes up.
Simply from changing nutrition.
Watered down gas in your gas tank, your car is not going to run at all.
You're right.
But, you can't run on an empty tank.
Yeah. Now, ladies, where can our listeners get their hands on a copy of this book, Conquering Concussion, Healing TBI Symptoms with Neurofeedback and Without Drugs?
Well, Neal, it's in all the usual bookstores and also Amazon. And you can see more information about it on Mary Lee's website at brainwellnessandbiofeedback.com. And we just recently posted the Kindle edition is just out. So all of those are available now.
Thank you.
And my office we're in Bethesda, Maryland, near Walter Reed. We have hard copies here.
Right. You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neal Howard, in studio with Mary Lee Esty and Carol Shifflett, authors of the book Conquering Concussion, Healing TBI Symptoms with Neurofeedback and Without Drugs. It's been great having you in studio today with us.
Thank you,
Neal.
Thank you, Mary, and thank you, Carol. Transcripts and audio of this program are available at healthprofessionalradio.com.au and also at hpr.fm And you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes.